Hello, everyone. Looks like we are live, and welcome back to Mission Top. Mission Top is a place, it's a farmstead and ranch, it's a family. My family, my name is Gary Nuila, but it is also a place of ideas. Yesterday we talked about how it's a kingdom, and today I'm going to add one more. In many ways, it's an identity. It's a way of life, and today we're going to get in a little bit into identity and what is meant by that, and why I would apply that to a place like Mission Top. So I am having a very strange moment here at Mission Top, kind of a strange manly moment, I guess you could say, in vein of the topic of many of these discussions. And that is because much of the body of Mission Top is gone right now. I am very much accustomed to being surrounded by 9 other bodies around me at all times here at Mission Top, and we're down to just one human body, and then this body of nature around me and lots of animal bodies and things like that. But a very different scenario, because usually I'm the one that's leaving for some kind of trip if we go off, or maybe Sarah and I will go away, but rarely has it ever been me here alone and everybody else off on a trip. So these are very strange, very full days, very much having a bachelor kind of moment here. And so to just give you an idea of kind of what this looks like, I get up, as I've told you before, my mind instantly starts working on this stream and kind of the initial morning things, just trying to kind of structure what I'm going to say, trying to insights that might have come during the night. I've got to get the dogs out there because they sleep in the house. We've got to get them out kind of to get themselves going, relieve themselves, all that. And we have to tend to the flocks and the swine, so I get to kind of do that. I'm the only, steward around here to take care of the things. So I've got to get out there and do the morning rounds to check on everything, right? And take care of the flocks and look at the swine. But again, these kind of just having this very bachelor masculine movement, even when you're looking at the pigs, which are getting very big, by the way. I'm just looking and seeing, that ham right there, on the back leg just kind of jiggle and thing. I'm looking, oh, look at that belly. I'm seeing the cuts of meat there. And of course, if I had my daughters around me, they'd say, Dad, stop thinking that way. We're not going to really actually harvest them, are we? And anyway, but me being here by myself, that's of course what I see in those pigs. So I come home, I get showered, I get presentable, have to go on a run. Well, I did a run with the dogs before that, and then get ready to deliver this, right? And that's what I've done these last 3 days. I get done with this, I have some lunch, and the larder, as I open up the refrigerator, has been, again, very bachelor-like. Compliments to my wife for looking after me. Not that I can't cook, I actually like to cook and things like that, but she took care to make this larder a very bachelor-friendly larder, heavy on the meat, lots of baked goods that some of my children had prepared, and a little light on the vegetables, right? So I even took a picture when they left. I'm like, wow, this is quite impressive what you left me here. So we'll have some lunch, go into town, take care of some business, conduct some errands, come back and again tend to the things that need tending to here, changing the pastures as we do daily with our sheep and goats, tucking those animals into bed, if you were, the chicks and the chickens are around, and putting them in their beds, walking the dogs. And then, that's kind of evening is coming down, and it's time to kind of hunker down for the night, because I'm kind of surrounded by a bit of a forest here. We have half of our land is pasture, half of Mission Top is forested, and we're kind of in the forested part. So as things get dark, things get very quiet, and if you're just by yourself, there's a bit of a hunker down, time to put on the defenses, the electrical fences and things like that, and kind of put on the lights in strategic places, go into the house and, do a little bit of, kind of you're hunkered down for the night once you're in there, right? And so we'll do that. You kind of batten down the hatches in the house, and then, it's time to maybe cook up a steak from this nice larder, turn on a nice manly movie that perhaps you wouldn't get a chance to watch given other people's preferences while they're away, and then you're done, and I guess it's off to bed, right? I mean, it's just like I guess this is how some people get to live. So it's been a very different experience for me. If you can imagine how all of that scenario would have been very different with 9 more people around rather than 1. And yeah, I can see the appeal of the bachelor life and things. But given that I have something to compare to, it's worth noting that I also see the incompleteness in such a life, and kind of see how, this is all that some people get forever. And I don't think I'd really want this forever for reasons that I hope are obvious. I'm being asked, what are the rest of Mission Top? They basically just went to visit family, and originally I was going to go with them, but as we kind of looked at what it takes now to take care of Mission Top and what we'd have to do to bring somebody in, and the reasons why they were going for this trip, which weren't something super important like a wedding or a family reunion or something like that, it was kind of deemed that it was best for me to just stay and look after things here so that everybody can just go and totally enjoy themselves, and we wouldn't have to be hiring somebody to come and take care of everything that needs to be taken care of here now. So that's where they are. Okay, well, now on to this episode. Let's start with this thumbnail. And I liked Giant Enemy Rooster, his comment already before the show started. Based on the direction this series is going so far, I'm going to bet the answer to this question is probably. So, how I think by this point, those of you that have been here for a while. So you probably know the answer to this question. But I think the answer that I'm going to get to, it's always important the way that it's framed, right? I think one way of describing kind of the approach I've given to manhood is to kind of ask the question, is it possible for guys, for males, to still be men today, to still be masculine, and to be proud about that, and everything that masculinity, the best version that masculinity has been in the past, right, in today's world, given today's concerns, given today's issues and the things that have changed and are important today. So that's a bit of a way of framing this, and resoundingly, I think you found my answer is yes, it is still possible. The very essence of manhood should benefit any society, right? And that's how we framed it the whole time. And the very essence of manhood is respectful and ennobling of women, right? Not something that denigrates women in any way. So we'll carry on very much in that same light today, but it's tricky with this one, right? It's tricky given the way that we are taught to see the world. And so I'm looking forward to this one, even though, like I've said a couple times, it's a fraught topic. Say something foolish here, say something wrong that could be mistaken, and you risk the possibility that somebody could swoop in and create problems for you, right? So back to the thumbnail. We've got here the Godfather, Don Corleone. So, and this is kind of funny because last night I decided to watch The Godfather. I've seen it before. It's been like over a decade since I watched it, because at least the 1 or 2 other times I've seen it in my life, I could see why it was seen as a well-made movie. I didn't particularly love the movie in the times that I'd seen it before. And yet, one of my favorite movie ranking systems, which is the IMDb Internet Movie Database site that's been around ever since the internet was in its early days, has this ranking system called the IMDb 250. And I've mentioned before, I really like this ranking system. I think it's just a good combo of the people that are on there and kind of that care about movies but aren't just the kind of snooty critics that you might get in something like Rotten Tomatoes where sometimes the critics get things really wrong in a lot of ways, and the audience is like, this movie is wonderful, and the critics are like, no, it's horrible. And you don't get that as much with IMDb. You get more of a balance. And anyway, on the IMDb 250, since I look at it a lot, they're at number 2. They'd stayed there for like over a decade, has been The Godfather. So I'm always like, maybe I need to understand this movie at a deeper level, and today was a good opportunity to do it. So I watched it last night. And surprisingly, now that I have so many more concepts about manhood, I mean, this movie is all about manhood in many ways, right? And so as I was thinking after I'd watched it and was thinking, oh, what's the, I was about to go to bed, what is the thumbnail I should use for tomorrow? It was, well, isn't it obvious, right? The Godfather, in a very real way, is a story about a head of a family. I mean, it's even calls him that many times, and how this head of the family eventually kind of comes to the end of his time, and the family has to goes through the transition to a new head of the family. But it's all about a masculine head of the family. So I thought this is the perfect thumbnail. You have the quintessential kind of classical or traditional head of the family here in Don Corleone, right? And he's the head of not just a large family, but an extended family. So it's even kind of a broader topic. He is the godfather. And in so many ways, he's a chief, he's a king in kind of the classic sense. And notably, he is not a good man, right? In kind of the Christian sense of being a good man. But that's where this principle comes in, that I think why it's such a good movie about manhood, because it shows that being a man isn't about being a good man. It's about being good at being a man, right? And he is good at being a man. He is the quintessential big man. If you reference back to our episode all about the big men and the big man concept, it's there across cultures, right? There's this brilliant first scene at his daughter's wedding and how people come to him and they must show him the proper respect and submission. And if they do, then he takes care of them, right? He does favors of them, but also expects, if he ever needs that to come to them, that they will heed his needs in his moments of need. He can be kind in this, right? He can be kind and considerate, but he's not a gentle man. You have to be a man first before you can be a gentleman, and he is not a gentle man. And there's another great moment there at the beginning of the movie where there's this singer that he helped make his career. And during the wedding, he shows up. The women swoon because he's kind of a sex symbol. He sings a song, but then he comes to visit Don Corleone, right? And as he gets there, he kind of breaks down and says, things have been tough for me lately. The voice isn't strong, and I wanted this movie part. And what am I going to do, Don Corleone? It's this fantastic moment where Don Corleone flies into a rage and says, get up, man. The first thing you need to do is act like a man. What is this? What is this sniveling? What is this that you're doing? And once he kind of gets him more calm, that okay, now let's take care of this movie part that you want, and he goes into his gentle part. But he's not, again, he's not a gentle man when it's not called for it. I bring that up to kind of hold out here what the classical idea, the traditional idea of the head of the family was so well portrayed in this. You can watch that movie if you want to see that, and it's a great framing for today of can we still have such men today? Of course, we'd want our men to be kind of better men than Don Corleone in that Christian sense, but even in seeing how he proceeds as a man, as the head of a family, you can actually see what's missing in particularly American Christianity, kind of the more modern Christianities, where there's been more than just me who has this opinion that on the whole, American Christianity has not done well at appealing to men that want to be men, right? It's been more about being a good man, which generally turns into the kind man, the gentle man, a man with soft hands, as you will, and a gentle touch. Whereas if you look at the Christian story, if you look at the story of Christ, he is not a gentle man either, in so many instances, and the great majority of instances. Yes, he's the good shepherd, and you can see him with the sheep, and yes, he says, suffer the children to come to me, and you have these images with Christ with the child, and the children around him. But on the whole, he is not a gentle man at all. And it's that aspect of Christianity, that aspect of being an effective man, a man that can say what needs to be said, a man that can call out people in a way that's not focused at the people, but the principles that are wrong, regardless of their feelings. I don't see Christ very considerate of other people's feelings, right? Which is something that is a very big pressure on us today in society, is we must be considerate of others' feelings. Okay, well, feelings can be deceived, folks. And so you see that that's not the case with a figure like Christ. And so that's why you can come back to Don Corleone, who's not a good Christian man, even though there's this contrast with kind of, they are adherents of the church, which is a complexity of the movie. And you see how he's a very effective person that's good at being a man without being a good man. And you see kind of what's lacking in much of modern Christianity. Not to say that people aren't trying to correct that as they should. Okay, but and the other thought that came to me is that with this movie, you can almost see the remake. If this movie got remade today, right, then you could imagine that it would probably start out the same with a Don Corleone figure, the head of the family in the traditional way, probably have some masculine sons that, as the Godfather kind of comes to the end of his time, the other sons are arising, but maybe the other mobsters, knock off these sons. And so the unexpected happens. It's one of his daughters that was maybe, a dainty, harmless belle at the beginning of the movie, over the course of the movie has to take the reins of the family, become a hardened character that is willing to take care of business and do what's needed to do to maintain the family business, as they talk about it in this mob movie. And so that would be the expected remake of the last few years, right? Because our notions, we've been playing with this notion that perhaps today the time is either to welcome new faces into the heads of the roles, such as the head of a family, or it's time for women to supplant men altogether. And we've had so many of those movies, thankfully. I think we've been seeing less of them in recent months, and in the last little while, it seems like these kinds of movies are waning. And they're always fun at first. Any new story pattern, because it's novel, is fun, and everybody, look at how they changed it, look at how they flipped this, and it's kind of fun for a while. But I think it's running its course, where everybody's like, that was a fun alternative version of a story, but there's something about it that also isn't a great story in the bigger sense. The way that they've just so many times just taken women characters and had them kind of supplant men and take the kind of masculine roles that used to be in movies. And so one positive sign lately was Raya and the Last Dragon, this last Disney movie, right? Where instead of kind of an oppressive father figure, you had a noble father figure. And you have a feminine, hero kind of character. But at the beginning of the movie, the father is a good father, and the father actually sacrifices himself in a way in order to help his daughter, and turns to stone for most of the movie. But the whole movie is this daughter trying to, you could say, reinstate the father, right? Bring him back and kind of put him in his proper place. And so you can see that kind of story pattern contrasted to a more, the dopey dad that's kind of get him out of the way so that the new, the new capable daughter can supplant and take, something even like Moana, for instance. If you see what happened in Moana's shell at the end of the movie, there was a mountain of chiefs, their stones being put ever higher on this thing, and at the end it's Moana's shell, and there's no stone that can be put higher than Moana's shell, which was shaped in not so subtle ways to have feminine attributes, right? And so you see how there was even this notion. I like Moana, I like that movie, but these kinds of things that were in movies of the last few years, just like, there's something wrong about that, Moana needs to be put the space for there to be chiefs after her as well, doesn't she? So anyway, to see that that's a little bit waning is encouraging, and that probably we won't see such a Godfather film that ends like that. So that's the intro to the episode, right? And that is kind of the framing of what we have. How should we see this head of the family type situation today? I see that some comments have gone in, so I want to, given this as a live stream, that's the fun of this. The added benefit of that is I can actually see what you're saying. So let's go to kind of some of the things you were saying before we kind of launch into the body of the episode. All right, so we have LSJT, and thanks for being here. The book, The Godfather, does a great job of contrasting Don Corleone to the younger man in that culture. He is always calm and temperate and is kind and respectful whenever possible. In contrast, the younger men are arrogant, self-pitying players, unable to control their temper. Sonny Corleone are far too ruthless and cold. Yeah, like here's what I think people love about this movie is that even though, of course he's a mobster, he orders killings and things like that. There's so much there beyond even just being, good at being a man. He's also a noble man in a lot of ways. He has respect for women. He has a good relationship with his family. He is a good family man. He is a provider. He has, some a temperance to him, a wisdom about him, right? And so that's where I think the complexity of the movie makes it so good, is that you have to contrast these noble attributes, both in just kind of regular noble virtues, manly noble virtues, and the fact that he is, a mobster at the same time. That's what I think makes it so good. Let's see, Christian says, I think being a good man is a necessary part of being the best as a man as possible. Don Corleone with more moral strength would be more of a man. Yes, and that's where, ultimately you end up with kind of the quintessential manly characters are more someone like Maximus or Braveheart or George Bailey, let's say, in It's a Wonderful Life, that kind of both manage to be men and complete men, right, in the full sense of the word, but also good men too, and I think everybody knows that's ultimately the ideal. Okay, so LCT are simply weakling children like Fredo. Yeah, that's good. And so many good films about manhood also have the different versions, right? Different people for you to contrast of kind of different versions of masculinity. I was talking the other day about how The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance has that as well. It kind of gives you this town with these two main characters that it's kind of asking who's the real man amongst them, but then you have all these different versions of men, and you kind of have to ask, is that a good man? Is that not? What's the positive of this one? What's his weakness, etc. Yeah, Giant Enemy Rooster, all the mobsters go to church. That's one of the funniest parts. I mean, there's the potent ending of the movie where Michael, he's the new godfather, and they're at the baptism of his godchild, but, and it's asking him if he follows Satan, and he's saying, no. And it's showing them knocking off all these mobsters. I mean, that's why people love this movie, right? Your theory about a daughter remake is funny, considering this is kind of what happens when Connie Corleone in Godfather 3, though she does not supplant men, she's just as shrewd and hardened as Michael. Okay, so yeah, and I haven't seen the third one, so it's interesting that move was already made. We already live in this modern world, so of course that would have to be an element of it. It's something on our minds, right? All right, so yes, this is a fraud episode. Hopefully we can kind of continue on this light of showing the right respect on the one hand, but levity on the other, which kind of helps us approach these topics. And one other caveat is that my basic position, too, is that in the end of the day, people should arrange their families and their roles and things like this as they see fit in their own family, right? Humanity is infinitely complex. Particular circumstances are infinite. So to any general categories that are ever laid out or we see in humanity, there's always exceptions, right? So I'm not trying to presume in anything that I say today that, I'm telling you how to arrange your life, right? And I respect particular people's decisions as to how they arrange their family. So that's got to underlie everything I say, even if I do kind of ultimately take a position. It's one, I'm very much the kind of person that if my neighbors were living something completely, opposite, or than me, they would still be my neighbors, and I would strive to treat them exactly the same and see them the same as any other neighbors. So anyway, just a good thing to put in there on an episode like this. So you already know that I deal so many times in the broad categories, in the categories that are the major categories, instead of focusing so much on the exceptions, although we give the exceptions their due from time to time, like in that episode that was on the exceptions to manhood. And one of the broad categories that persists, that you see me bringing up again and again, is masculine and feminine, because it's a part of life that we all interact with. We know it isn't going away. It's part of the natural world in so many ways, and seems to be embedded more than just in the physical kind of biological way that things play out, but actually in the very nature of reality itself. And hopefully, if you've been listening to me to a while, you've been able to kind of see deeper and deeper ways that there's this kind of dual nature and this possibility of these dualities combining in so many ways throughout reality, you could say. And in those conceptions, the masculine is pretty much always conceived of as higher than the feminine, right? And so that's the kind of undergirding of our question today. Does that mean that a man should be the head of the family, right? And with that is the question that kind of underlies why it's a fraught question, is because should higher be conceived as better, more powerful, more ideal? Because if it is, then you're saying the man's more powerful, better, higher, more ideal, and the woman is less so. So, that bugs us. There's something wrong that we feel about that. So let's dive into that and see if we actually should have that assumption, right? That leads us to that wrong kind of feeling about calling a man the head of the family. There's several ways of conceiving the head of a family, first of all, and we've been talking the last 2 days about kingdoms. And so another thing that I want to lay out right here from the beginning is that the fullest way to see the head is as I've been portraying it in a kingdom, which is the union of masculine and feminine as being the head of a kingdom or the head of a family. So, instead of just having, it's not just the king that's the head of a kingdom or the queen that's just the head of the kingdom, it's them together as the monarchy, the crown, that unified entity that is the kind of, I think, the best way of seeing the head of a family. So that underlies this and needs to be part of understanding how I approach this whole thing. And as I've done before, I bring up this yin-yang symbol because it's such a good way of portraying the way that this should be. It's even shaped in a circle, like a head. If you can imagine a stick figure, right? This would be the head, and it's this one unified whole. And it shows, both the masculine and the feminine, the man and the woman is something unified, working together. And there's no need to see it as something separate. The best way is to see it as something that's not separate, okay? Nonetheless, there is this reality that we do see the separate parts of it. Even in the yin-yang symbol, we can see the light part, we can see the dark part, we can see that we can see a separation in there. So we can't just pretend that it doesn't exist as well. Two things can be true at the same time. It can be a unified being and something as the head, but you can also see a separation in it. And traditionally, you always see the masculine part of it, which is the white part in the yin-yang symbol, in a way portrayed as higher. But I should bring that back one more time, because that's the beauty of the yin-yang symbol, is that even as you go up the symbol to the higher part, you see that the feminine is there to the very end of the highest parts of the masculine part. And if you go down, down in the direction of the symbol, you see that the masculine is there the whole time as well. And so there's never this thing of these stark contrasts of just, man as separated from woman and their roles are completely separated, or masculine as separated from feminine. There's this union that is this intermeshing in which they're both there always, right? And that's the kind of thing if you start from this position, everything else, I think, makes so much more sense in conceiving why you would still call like the man in a family the head of a family today, and why we could feel comfortable about it. This kind of lays down those principles of how that can be the case. So there's other ways that people like to conceive this that also have their kind of useful utility in the conception. Some people like to say man is I guess we should start out. So in this yin-yang symbol, you could say that man is just the higher part of the head, right? Or the masculine is the higher part of the head. But another way would be to say that man is the head and woman is the neck, okay? Some people like that because, it shows the power of the woman's part, the greater power that she might have, and that's that it's the neck that actually gets to decide what the head, where it turns, what it pays attention to, as it were. And we're going to get into why that's the case, right? Some people like to say that man is the head and the woman is the heart, okay? And there's something true about that too. And even in that word, I'm thinking they're probably etymologically related. Within that word heart is very close to the word hearth, right? And there's a feminine goddess that I find a very compelling goddess in the Greek god pantheon, which is Hestia, which was goddess of the hearth. If you can kind of see the hearth in a traditional home and in an ancient home would have been probably the central part where you have the fire, which is also where the cooking takes place in the heart of the home, right? And And so that sounds like, oh, you're just saying that, women are tied up with the kitchen again. And I say, well, the problem with that isn't that women are tied up with the kitchen. The problem with that is that we've denigrated, the kitchen in our conception of what the kitchen is. If the kitchen is the hearth, the heart of the home, as it is with so many homes, right? Then you should instead see the kitchen as a sacred, holy space, right? Much more holy than other parts of the home, in as much as it's part of the heart of the home. And I can see when we're warming up frozen burritos in today's world, I can see why, we would see it as kind of just a non-sacred kind of base or degraded space. But I think traditionally you would have seen the hearth, the heart of the home, where women traditionally did more of their activities as something very close to or very sacred. And we'll get into this more in future episodes, where one that I want to make is showing how the family dinner is a sacred ritual and should be seen that way, and can be that for your family if it's not alive with all the spirit and feeling and life and music that a ritual should have, right? And so if you start to kind of see the home in that way, then you see that, okay, yeah, I could see how a woman would be closer to the heart of the home. It's worth saying that, like, in a home, you can maybe the only more sacred space than the kitchen, where you think about it. If a stranger comes to your house, you're pretty comfortable having them there on the periphery of your property, on the sidewalk or something. Maybe if for certain people, you'll invite them onto your porch or deck, and maybe even into your living room or something like that. But it's only close associates. It's only people that you are more comfortable with, that have a better relationship, that you would take them into the kitchen, right? That's kind of, again, a more sacred sphere you don't take everybody into. And then where would be the most sacred space of all? That's like the master bedroom, right? Where the masculine and the feminine make their abode. And even in my house, like, I have to remind my children about this all the time. This is not your bedroom, and it bugs me usually when all my kids are in my room, because, like, this is the holy of holies of the house, and you are denigrating this sacred space, and get out of here, right, before it's becomes unholy forever. There's something about that of how the home. Again, it's shaped. The home is just like us. We have those kind of spaces within us. A home has those kind of spaces. A society, a temple is built the exact same ways, right? So I just kind of throw those little tidbits in there, because it's all the way that these things all, in the sense we've said that the world lays itself out fractally as patterns within patterns. The more you can see these patterns in certain spaces, the more you see them elsewhere. Such as why it would make sense to say that the man is like the head of a family and the woman is a heart, right? But like I said, there's different ways of seeing that, so it's perfectly fine to say that woman is part of the head rather than the heart, if you don't want to see it that way. All these kind of have an aspect of truth to them, while not, you can't take them too far either, right? Okay, but no matter how do you look at it, all the traditional conceptions end up with you having the man being the higher part of the head, okay, or just outright said as the head of the family. And so this concerns us today, obviously, because one of our basic assumptions is that, as I was saying before, higher is better, higher is more powerful, right? And you could say this is one of the fundamental assumptions that's been underlying so much of feminism, right? Because feminism is a varied thing, so I can't say that all feminism has been like this, because there's been all these different waves of feminism, and you have to really get into particulars of knowing what anybody means by it these days. But one of the core things in a broad part of feminism has been this notion that there is more power higher up in hierarchies in society. Women should have equal or more power than men, right? Women have traditionally been denied the higher places of power. Hence, there should be more women in the higher places, such as CEOs, presidents, halls of government in today's world. That's kind of one of the basic arguments. And it's like, yeah, fair enough. I mean, there's obviously something true to that, right? But I also over and over want to challenge that kind of idea that that's the only way of conceiving of power, because it turns out that's a very masculine way of looking at the world. And it's quite odd because perhaps maybe even feminists have lost the ability to see the more feminine way of looking at the world. It doesn't quite look at the world. The world doesn't look the same through those kinds of goggles, in my opinion, and we'll get to that. Consider, one more thing to consider here is, well, actually, let me pause again because I see that there's some more comments coming in, and I always find it, helpful to kind of see what you're saying. So let's see. LSJT, I think it's interesting how many men want to be leaders, but forget that, as Jesus said, those who are greatest among you should take the lowest rank. The leader should be as a servant. Yeah, being a leader is not nearly as much about bossing people around and being reverence and respect than it is about listening and helping others. I think of men who understood that, they would, if they understood that, they would be better. And I think if women understood that, they would not balk as much at the idea of men leading them. You say you're on a rant. I don't think it's a rant at all. I mean, you're exactly getting where we're headed. So definitely you're already kind of paving the way for exactly where this is going in so many ways. But one helpful way that I have to see it, it's funny how these things are out there if you start looking for them. And I brought this up before, is the chessboard, right? And so I'd ask women, of all the players or all the characters on the chessboard, who would you rather be, right? Would you rather be the king or the queen on the chessboard? Because it's interesting how they have substantially different natures, although the king and the queen are both important, the pivotal pieces, you could say, right? And so the nature of the king, of course, is that it is more constrained, can't move very much at all in there, and yet there's an importance to the king because it has the whole identity of that that side of the chessboard, and the whole identity and tied into that side winning or losing, right? Whereas the queen is this powerful piece because of her versatility. She can move in so many different ways that other people can't. And it's interesting that we've been playing this game for a very long time, and yet it seems it continues to engage us. And is it just because it's a fun kind of mathematical exercise of possibilities and patterns and things like that, or is it because there's actually patterns of meaning tied into there as well? Why were these? And even if it's just a fun game, why was the queen given those attributes and the king given those attributes, right? And so when I play chess, I kind of like the queen figure a lot better and being that and playing that piece than I do the king. So at least for my answer on that, that's where I think a lot of people would say it. And you see the power of the queen in there, but it's a different kind of power because she doesn't hold the identity of the whole side and the whole game in it, right? So let's look then at the duties of what a head does of anything, and this is exactly where LSJT was going with. What is a head of something actually supposed to be doing? A good head, and this very much related to our notion of the good king. So we've been over many of these things before, but I'll add the primary one that I've just been mentioning with the board, this notion of identity. Okay, and so one of the roles of the head is to give the body, the kingdom, an identity. A way to define itself, and that's a way a kingdom is seen. Is it's seen in the head, in the crown, as they define what the whole nature of the kingdom is. That person's kingdom, you could say. And so you see here these kind of things that become mysterious, such as why is it that the name of a family follows the masculine line, right? That the identity of the family follows the masculine line and not the feminine. Occasionally, in some societies, it does follow the feminine, but predominantly we see it following the masculine, right? And so, again, in modern terms, when we can't see the world this way, it seems wrong. Like, yeah, why should that be the case? That kind of seems wrong. That seems like you're losing the woman in the process, and she's just as important. So, we got to combine these names together, right? And that's what people do. Or we should be just as open to going by the woman's name and identity as the man's, and that should be negotiated. And it's like, again, fair enough, that can be negotiated, and some couples do, But you have to ask, why is it that most people still don't decide to do that? I mean, overwhelmingly, most people still decide to keep the identity, the name of the man in the family. So there's something tied up in the duties of the head to define and give a name and an identity to a family. And so with that is the notion of a vision too, I would say. It's the role of a leader to set out a vision of what should be headed towards. So not just who we are, but what are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to go, right? And this is one that also we haven't been talking about so much in these other episodes, but is vital, right? You need that from you expect that and need that from the head. We know that that's what a CEO is supposed to do, is provide a direction and a vision for the body that it is the head over. And tied up with that is something we've covered a lot, is that vision should be heading towards something better, right? A higher ideal. There should be something that the head identifies as being beyond what the body and the identity is now. This is who we are now, but there's this highest thing that we have to submit to. So already here, one thing I want you to see is that being the head never means you are actually the head of everything. It's not a thing of dominance like was brought up by LSJT, because a good head always recognizes that they're just the lower part of something greater, okay? And so this is one of those key notions that this is the way that men can, again, be heads and masculine again, is by showing that they realize that they are feminine to something else, right? And so that's just in that very move right there, you see that there's not something inherently tied up better with being higher up, right? Because even higher up things always have things above them when they're properly conceived, okay? What else does the head have the duty to do? It has the duty to care and to love that which is below, right? The body. And so when you're talking even of, masculine and feminine, male-female relations, that is the role of the highest part of the being, which would be the man, as we're setting him out as the head, is to love and care for that which below. And if it's anything I've learned about women, most women like to be adored, right? Like to be dazzling to men, like to be cared for, like to be cherished is another kind of appropriate word. Of course, there is notions of beauty tied up with that, but like as LSJT has brought up before, that can't be the only thing that we see in women and the only way they can be dazzling and beautiful. So I'm talking about physical beauty. Of course, there's fuller senses of beauty in which women can be, loved, lovable, cherishable to something higher. And I think, again, my experience with girls and women has been that this is one of the predominant desires of women, is to be loved, cherished, adored. Okay, so that is the duty of what's above, is to love, care for that which below. With that comes the duty to provide, to make sure things are taken care of. Just again, I was out there today because as the head of Mission Top, I need to go and take care of all these lower things out there. It's just part of the duty. I should have grouped this in with vision and with the higher ideal, but there's this notion to lead out, right? To kind of take the first step, to initiate. And that's where you get in kind of chivalry of old, the expectation that it is the guy, like in a dating relationship, that should lead out, that should take more first steps, right? That should initiate more. Again, not to say that the women can't do it, and many women, have decided they're going to initiate, they're going to kind of take the lead in like a dating relationship and stuff, and they can, right? That's been like the thing. It's like everybody, you've proven it, you can, right? But is that really what you want to do predominantly? That's the question we're going to get to. Does it work out better for you that way? Okay. The other thing that a head's supposed to do is take ultimate responsibility for the entity, okay, for the kingdom or the body. The buck stops with the highest thing. And so, of course, the woman takes responsibility also for the family, but the highest, head of the family would take ultimate responsibility for all aspects of the family. So that's got to be there. Along with provide, this goes into our whole manhood series. There's also this notion of protecting, because if you think out what is it to protect something? Well, in the manhood series, we got into that the whole thing that you're protecting is a perimeter. Okay, and so think of a perimeter. Instead of the word perimeter, think of identity. Okay, and so if the head is tasked with that job of maintaining the identity of a body, and identity is something that holds together, that defines who you are as a one thing rather than separate things, then there's going to be perimeters there. There's going to be borders there. They can be physical borders, they can be conceptual borders, and they need to be maintained and protected if you're to hold together the identity. So that predominantly, lies with the highest, with the head of the body. And we talked about how, that's why, just a stark example of how this works is why, in war, there's so much rape going on as one, body comes to take over another body, you could say, is because right there, they've penetrated the borders, you could say, of another entity, and very soon they're messing with the identity of that whole body through rape by making it so that the population of the body that's been taken over is now in doubt and being kind of again mixed and taken over by the identity of the attacking force. Okay, so again, fractal nature reality. It's crazy how these things work at so many different levels of reality, but it's the job of the head then to maintain those perimeters, maintain those borders of identities, of physical things, etc. And that's a good head. And then, I was going to say identify and look to a higher ideal, but we already covered that. Okay, so hopefully when you see that, you see something like the good king, right? And instead of seeing something tyrannical and domineering, although all those attributes could be turned to a dark side, they can all be taken either to an excess or a lack, either of which would be vices. This Aristotle's notion of all virtues taken to an extreme become a vice. All those things can turn bad in different ways, but properly done, you see how there is a good head that properly takes a stance towards a body that is helpful towards the body, that is essential for the whole body. And so, what I get to when I go through that list of attributes of what a head should be doing is like, you tell me, women, do you want your man doing that, or do you not want him doing that? You tell me, you decide. And of course, someone will say, no, I want to do it. That's me. There's some very masculine women, and they want to take that role. And there's this notion of that goes among men when you see a woman like that in a relationship, and the guys say, well, we know who wears the pants in that family, right? And it's funny because it's this symbol that in many cases actually, the women actually live out. Like in my faith tradition, there was kind of a high moment where the women were really exerting themselves to be more masculine, you could say, in the church. And what did they start doing? They started wearing pants to church as a symbol that they were kind of, again, imposing themselves in a masculine way on the church, because we all know what that kind of means in a world of pants and dresses. And so some women are free to do this. If that's what they want, they can do this, and they can find a male, you might even say, who is kind of feminine to all the masculine attributes that this woman has. And we see relationships like that. Some people make that work, and so that's what some women want, right? But I think the majority of women that I know, that I see out there in the world, actually probably look at that list of attributes of the head and say, yeah, it would actually be nice if my husband would do a lot more of that, because he's not. That's generally the complaint, is that you're not doing so many of those things that it would be awfully nice for you to do, and I'm having to fill in because you're not measuring up. And that's generally the more common complaint I see from women. Again, maybe I just know the wrong women, but that's across the political spectrum and everything. That's more of what I see in the world than not. But that's just my perspective. And again, I should say, the best conception is that this is not starkly separated. Even these attributes of the head, as you can see, if a woman is part of the head, of course she's fulfilling all those as well, and she can, right? So that those are the things I need to say over and over so that it's obvious that I'm not saying women can't do that, right? And they do that, and they should do that as men and women are properly conceived as a unified being forming the head of a family. But I think what I'm suggesting is that even women, most of the time, and kind of most of the time, you would want the man doing more of that, right? Leading out, you could say, in all those attributes, rather than being kind of the more passive force in those attributes. And that's my basic kind of conception, I guess you could say. So once again, I want to go to see what you're saying. We'll kind of take a little breather at this point and then move into the next points. So JM, and again, I'm seeing some new names. Always love to see new names on here, or maybe you've been on here before and I'm just not remembering that you've been on here, so apologies if that's the case. But how do you avoid being too dogmatic, tyrannical about this, like the order and the sacredness of the bedroom? Do you explain your thoughts, principles to your children? Yeah, I do. We set out rules about it predominantly, like you need to knock before you come into our bedroom, even if there's an open door. Even if, just regardless, you need to knock before you come in our bedroom. Yeah, even if it's not locked, you need to, and for hopefully obvious practical reasons, that is a good thing in any family on many different levels, is that you knock before you come in parents' bedrooms. And so, do they do it perfectly? No, but we lay out these borders that are workable. And especially the little kids, they can't always heed this, and so you kind of deal with people on the level that they should be. So I get really mad at my teenagers when they just flaunt, or not flaunt, but just kind of are flippant with this standard and they don't heed it. I get really mad at them, and less mad with a 2-year-old who doesn't understand it yet, right? So that's what we do, is we lay out, and I even teach them that this is this is not your room. And in fact, in the terms of the last time we were talking about how the family, I think, is best conceived as a kingdom. So, this isn't your kingdom yet either. You have things in it. You have your room. You have your things. But you are still in the process of being raised up to have your own kingdom, as it were. And this is my room, my sacred space, and you'll observe it. Once that standard's there, then I can be nice about it, right? And once there's those expectations, if they want to come up in the morning and greet your parents in bed and things like that, as children like to do, okay, yes, welcome in, and all they have to do is say, hey, mom and dad, can I come in? And yes. So once you've set and are willing to enforce those borders, you can be a lot nicer person about it. But you do have to be willing to enforce the borders, and even explain the concept of sacred space to your children, because it's an awful useful concept in the world that we've totally lost, right? Not totally, but in large part in our society. Jenny Rooster, make the room boring to them. That's hard to do with your parents' room. The parents' bedroom is all, it's just like the Holy of Holies in a temple. It's a pretty interesting place there, especially if you're told you can't go into it. That would be my dad's solution, and my, Giant Enemy Rooster says. So, that is one way you could do it, but I have not been successful at making my room boring, because they know, there's hidden things in Dad's room, little treats he's maybe hidden in some place, or there's a sense of mystery in your parents' bedroom. What are they really up to? And for good reason, right? Okay, Jam, I like the pragmatism, Giant Enemy Rooster. And LSJT, women are often miserable and exhausted today, told we must not only play the masculine role, but also shun the feminine role. That's the thing. And I think there's mixed messages too. Sometimes it's like, take on the masculine, but shun the feminine. And then sometimes it's, no, you need to be feminine and masculine, and good luck doing all that, right? And that's the kind of, exhausted woman of today that senses this pressure of all the things they need to be. So that's a good point. Ratha, I think women who take leadership positions will come to become resentful, talking relationships, not work, especially in times they feel weaker. Yeah, and they can if they feel like they're forced into it. Like again, that's more what I see with like women in a family who feel like they're having to lead out in the family because they were made to. Again, not to say that there aren't so many ways in which women can take leadership positions that they want to take on in so many ways in life, but when they're kind of forced into it, like in a family, because somebody's not measuring up, there's probably going to be resentment there. LSJT, women are more aware of their mortality and finitude than men. They know, though they hate to admit it, that they need protection. That's why healthy women will always seek strong men. And yeah, I mean, I see that for sure. And you know, of course, there's different types of strength, and different women kind of feel a need for a different type of strength. Oftentimes, physical strength. Sometimes that's still relevant in the world. Like, you know, here at Mission Top, it's nice to have physically strong guys around. But of course, there's different types of masculine strength that beyond the physical that women can benefit from as well. Jim, thanks for the reply. I'm new, but a longer time subscriber. Jasper. All right, well, welcome, and I'm glad you're participating. Feel free to do so anytime. All right, Aman, I once heard the saying, if the man is the head of the family, the woman is the neck as it directs the head. Yes, and we brought that up, and it's one of the things we're going to get into a little bit of how, of showing the powers of women, you know, the feminine powers that they hold. Because you guys are doing such a good job, I'm gonna let you guys build up more comments, and I'm just gonna go on with the presentation at this point, and then we'll circle back to the circle back. It sounds like a very business term today, but we'll get back to the chat. So again, if a man does all these things as part of the head, you know, the other thing I want to ask women is, does this denigrate you? Does this, you know, make you something lesser and lower, or does it ennoble you, right? Does it enable you? Does it make more space for your capacities to flourish, right? I don't like to use the word empowered. I think it's so much tied up with that notion of masculine power today. So, you know, it's been a popular word in the last 5 to 10 years of how can we empower, you know, people. But that's where I'm like, you know, power is not the right word at the end of the day that adequately describes us, because we've tied in power to, like, again, masculine power, political power, power of the CEO kind of thing. And there's different types. So I don't like that word empowered. But yeah, does it ennoble? Does it enable? Does it open up possibility? And so that's the thing that I want to leave. What does this most, if a man does this, what does it leave a woman? And I'm going to say a grand space of possibility, right? And here, let's get back to the chess piece. If a man's doing all those things that he's supposed to do as the head and fulfilling them well, that's a very constraining list of attributes, right? It constrains you into only some very direct actions. And there's the chess piece, you know, the king chess piece being more constrained. So there is a power in it. It's power that's tied up with the whole identity of the body, but it's very constraining, okay? And so if a man is taking on that kind of constraint, what does that leave for women? I would say it leaves a possibility for creation. And that's why the queen chess piece can move in more ways. She's more versatile, has more possibility to her. And so what can she do? If her man is a good head, what can she do? I'd say the list is endless, right? She could be a scholar, she can be an artist, she can run a business and have the space to start a business where it doesn't even have to make money if the head is already taking care of the other things in life. In the early years where making money as a business is difficult, she can do a nonprofit, she could be the president of the United States, she could take care of other people that she wants to. You know, you don't have to be a woman doing all those things in the world. She could be a homemaker and cook and do the things that some women enjoy, you know, despite how, you know, other people have come to see all the homemaking things as lesser things, which I don't think they are. Yeah, you can take care of people. And then, yes, at the end of the day, it turns out most women along the line, some space want to create a new living being, and they are that. If a man is fulfilling that role of the head, then there is the possibility for her to fill the space of her possibility with a new being and take care of that, right? So I put that last because, I know a lot of women don't want to be, have being a baby factory, as is said, which I think is a horrible term, but as the first one on the list today, you put that at the last of the list, even though most women at some point that I know, and by statistics of all I've seen, want that at some point of her life. And so is it easier to do that if she's also having to be the head, or does she have that greater space of possibility if somebody else is filling that role so that she can do what she wants to do, what needs to be done, that's where I think this conception opens up the space for women to do what they do best, which is fill a space of possibility with something meaningful, and a man to do what he does best, which is to kind of be constrained into a space of duty and rigidity, which oftentimes in a hierarchy to climb and something to achieve, which he also does exceptionally well, right? And when it works together, it works very nicely and leaves, in the end of the day, a whole lot of a different kind of freedom for both parties involved, right? And so let's now go to this question of the head and the neck. If the man is the head and the woman is the neck, how does that work, even in this way that we've been talking about? So there's this concept of how a woman frames the space for a man to establish an identity. So let's think about it even in the terms of a family. If a man wants to continue this identity, his name, the name of his family, and continue it on, he cannot do that, right, without a woman. She is the space, she is the frame in which that identity can continue. And if he doesn't have that woman, the identity doesn't continue. So she has an awful lot of power because she offers the only way that a man can continue in that way. And if you think about it, so you can see it with just like procreation in that way, but see it in the terms of anything else, like a kingdom. If the feminine is more is more composing kind of the body of the kingdom and is in the heart of the kingdom, you could say, well, the king can't just do anything he wants. Anything the king wants to do in terms of establishing an identity, accomplishing anything, can only be done if the lower parts of the kingdom are willing to go along with it, right? Otherwise, he has this great vision and identity that he wants to implement, but there's a revolt, there's a rejection of that vision. So he can only do what will be accepted by the lower thing, okay? And there's the power of the lower thing. So this happens all the time, in families. This happens with me all the time, even with my wife, and has throughout our marriage, where I come up with all sorts of ideas. I'm an idea man, I'm a vision man. There's things that I see, hey, let's do that. And guess what? I can only do them in most cases if she is willing to go along with them, right? And so she constrains this, many ideas I know that she would never accept. So my space of vision, of the possible visions, are constrained by what my wife is willing to go along with. And so I always have to think in those terms. And so she frames the space in which I can act. And it's incredible how women do this in stories throughout history. And that is a tremendous power. That is a tremendous kind of, I think it's a bad image, but a halter, a constraint, a rein in on men and as being the head. Okay. And if he doesn't do this well, if he doesn't heed the space that's been framed, then again, he loses the body, he loses the kingdom. And what's a king without a kingdom? Without a queen and without a kingdom is nothing, right? And that's the power of the queen and of the body of the kingdom. So, and in that, so that gives you kind of what women's right always is towards a male head, is that she always has the right to protest, right? We've talked about this with the kingdoms, to protest, to rebel, to leave, right? And guess who initiates most of divorces, right? It's women, because we live out so many of these patterns, whether we like it or not. And yeah, it's generally the woman who says, I've had enough with this identity and this vision. I'm through and I'm out of here. You now have no identity, no kingdom. I'm separating this. And so it makes complete sense. Why? Because that is the women's right as to a head if things aren't going appropriately and can't be resolved in a way that works for both the unity of the masculine and the feminine, the head and the body, etc. Right? But the opposite is also true. If she chooses not to go along, and if she chooses to protest and rebel and say, I'm not doing this, well, then she risks losing all those attributes of the head. Risks losing somebody that's setting out a vision, that's leading out, that's making things happen as they should. And so there's always this kind of fraught negotiation going on that women have a huge check on the masculine head, and the masculine head has a huge check on the woman, because he can say, okay, well, if you don't want to, then I'm not going to fulfill this role. Okay? And like we said, then you're left with women that, inevitably in life, they have to then step into that kind of role, and many women are forced to in families when the guy just abdicates his role of fulfilling those kind of things. Okay, another good stopping point here. So let's see what you've been saying. John Emily Rooster said, I remember many times as a kid asking my dad for help with homework, as he'd offer seemingly helpful but actually horrible solutions that were more difficult. After a while, I realized what he was doing, and I found it kind of funny. And yeah, for some reason, I've seen that too. Especially the younger you are, again, it's not that dads can't help and be helpful, but they're less helpful. And then I found that the older that you get, dads usually become more useful in terms of even homework and things like that. Ratha, competence is greater than strength, in my honest opinion. Yeah, so that's one way of kind of framing strength, or restating it in a different way that brings in more. And that's another video I'd like to make, kind of using movie examples, is that ultimately the foremost attribute women, I think, are looking for in men is competence, because you see this in movies all the time. No matter how sexy the man is, or how physically strong he is, or any of the other attributes, if he's not also competent, it never works, right? He may be rich, but if he's not competent, there can be no romance and stuff. So I think you're exactly right that underlying everything is a sort of capability or competence that must be there for any woman to really be attracted to a man. Carlos Dura, the strong, masculine, independent women asking in their late 30s where all the good men have gone, pathetic. So, yeah, I mean, what's the helpful way to see that? There is a sense in which I wish there was this more full conception from the beginning, because it just works better rather than, kind of going down a path of a lot. This is the pressure on women today is, again, there's this notion that they have to be a certain way, that they're told like that they have to have a career of a certain sort, that they have to do these things. And then once they go down that path, it makes it more difficult to find a man that can fulfill this role and give these other benefits that are still there. I mean, that's for sure. The women find freedom and security, which is the opposite of men. Yes, although I'm going to get to one thing that I think men have a tendency to fall back into a certain kind of security that I'll get into. Christian, people have been obsessed with the word power. Have you seen a lot of activists have started using rest in power, like the person is dead, isn't peace the greater virtue at that point? So let me read that again. Have you seen a lot of activists have started using rest in power? Oh, okay, like the person is dead, isn't peace the greater virtue at that point? I mean, it used to be rest in peace, and it's rest in power. Well, I think the point that he's seen in that is that, when you take out the higher value systems of the world, the traditions that laid out a bigger framework of values and meaning, and you take that away, which is where our society largely is, then the only obvious thing left there is to see everything in terms of power. And so that's how so many activist movements just see the world. Who has power and who doesn't? Masculine power in general. who has power, who doesn't. Whoever has less of it is better and more noble and should get more power. Whoever has the power should be taken down. And that, pretty much sums up all the activist movements like going on today, right? And so yes, this world is framing things, but always in terms of masculine power. That's the funny thing, is that everybody doesn't realize that fundamentally underlying things, they've accepted a man's world as being underlying. And we'll get to that in a second, of how there's different kinds of power going on that don't even really fit in the word power, but yet they are powerful, Okay, LSGT. I once heard a woman say she felt more free in her relationship with her husband than she ever felt single. I agree totally that when women is led well, her creativity blossoms. Yes, I mean, again, I think it opens up this greater freedom. Who, Carlos? I don't think we need to denigrate anyone, and I appreciate where people are coming with this. These are difficult topics, so like Pena, LSG, Carlos, Dura, I'm 25 and feel like I've felt that the way my whole adult life. I'm sorry, but there's a dearth of young in Western culture today, as there's a dearth of good women. So yeah, like the one thing I think let's always try to turn this like in the most productive light of seeing how anyone says. So everybody's saying things that in their essence have good points to them. And for example, I totally agree there. One thing that is so frustrating for women today is that there is a dearth of good men. And so just by the odds there, that means that many women can't find good men. I mean, just by the odds. It also means that any man who can be a good man, you're going to have a lot of choice. It's definitely more favorable to a good man today than it is for a good woman that doesn't want to settle, right? And those are the odds. Okay, Ratha, I was a strong masculine woman. All right, Amon says competitive roles versus complementary roles. Yeah, exactly. These things shouldn't be seen as competitive. They are complementary. Great point. Chris Nemo, LSGT, completely agree. As Gary's often said, a good man these days is so in demand. Finding a good woman is not hard. The shortage is on the male side. Yeah, and of course, as always, it's like, I think there are more good women than men. Doesn't mean that all women are good either. There's plenty of rotten women as well, but they tend to be a lot less than men that aren't measuring up. LSGT, Carlo, also women are lied to and told they'll be happy in the masculine role. They discover over time how wrong this is, but then it's often too late. I wouldn't be so quick to judge. And that's a good point also. This is the story that's being sold by society. And watch me try. I love your channel, so thank you. I'm going to, once again, kind of jump out of the chat and get back into making the last points on this one, and then we'll come back to the chat again. So one thing I've said before, I'll say again, a woman can do all these things with the head, but if you occupy that position, then what of the man? Like, if women take that role, well, where do you leave the space to act? And what do you want a guy to do then, right? And so this is where I say that there's this tendency in guys that I think for a very specific reason, that if he is not kind of prodded into and celebrated into taking these types of roles, which are usually very beneficial to other people, then don't be surprised if you find that other people end up taking care of him. Okay? Because there is this tendency to regress back to a relationship that was more secure and comfortable that a man was once in, right? It's where all guys started. That was a motherly relationship where they were dependent and taken care of, and it was a peaceful, great place where everything was nice and taken care of and warm and loving. And so if a man isn't in this other kind of head role, just don't be surprised if you find him in one way or another regressing to a dependency on a mother in some way, whether the mother is the government, whether the mother is his actual mother still and father, the person living in the basement playing video games, etc. The thing about society today is that he can pull it off, right? A lot of guys with very little effort, there's so much abundance in the world and so much bounty, which is tied up with femininity, that a guy can very much regress into that kind of secure, boyish dependency on different kinds of mothers again. And so if you take that out from him, just don't be surprised if that's where he ends up. Okay, so here's a fraught question to kind of wrap. We're almost done, but kind of start wrapping things up in. It's a nice fraught question that hopefully generates a lot of discussion. So I've been saying that in my previous episodes that in a kingdom, that which is above, right, has all the duties we've laid out above, but that which is below also has duties, right? And among those duties are those duties to obey and to submit and to reverence, in a sense, that which is above. Okay, and so the question arises, does a woman have the duty to submit and obey to her husband? And we kind of cringe a little bit to hear it, that idea of submission and obeying a husband. And so my answer is going to be no and yes. Okay, so on the no, I've already said that women always have this out, or they should. Right? They should. I can't say that it's always been the case in history because it hasn't, but they always should have this choice of the out, which is to protest. And, women are good protesters when things aren't happening right in the kingdom, right? And they have the right to rebel and kind of fight against things, and they have the right to separate. And so at the end of the day, there's always that out. But I'm also going to give a yes on this answer too. And that is when the head is properly acting as the head. Okay, first of all, again, the women and the men are both part of the head. There should be an interaction. There should be a discussion and negotiation and all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, like if you take something to the extreme, if the head is doing what he's supposed to, and then also looking to that higher ideal, and being he is submitting to some higher ideal than everything else below him, right? Then when he is properly doing that, I would say, yes, a woman has the duty to submit and obey the head, if that's the husband or her man or whatever, right? However, again, kind of being fraught in that, she gets to make that judgment, right? So she has to make that thing of like, maybe I don't understand all it. Let's put how this could arise, because it's actually arisen a couple times, very rarely in my own marriage, where again, we're both part of the head. There's a constant negotiation, conversation over topics. What should we do? What should our family be like? All the things of the head. There's this constant interaction of the masculine and the feminine. But occasionally there have come a couple moments in our life where we've disagreed on kind of what should be the vision or the thing we do in our family, right? And so at the end of that day, it's had to come down to a moment where I have to say, look, all I can say is that I'm looking to something higher than me. In my case, I'm going to call it God, okay? And I feel that all I can say is that I feel that this is God, what God wants us to do, what this higher ideal wants us to do. And I have no choice, in essence, but to submit to that, okay? And so, I essentially lay it out there. You don't see that this is the right answer, or you don't agree with it, or don't understand it completely. And so you have a choice. This is essentially the stakes in this kind of situation that my wife has. You have a choice of either not going along with me in this, okay, and that's your right, or of saying, I have a better vision. I don't see you as the head anymore, okay, and then you risk me saying, I'm done being the head. Then I'm done making a vision. I'm done leading out. I'm gonna abandon that, right? And you can see there's the fraught moment, and so in the end, if I lay things out under those terms, in those handful of moments in our relationship, my wife has decided to essentially submit to what I wanted to do, right? But of course, it's fraught, even from my case, because there's immense pressure. If I'm wrong, right, then of course that has tremendous consequences. So I have to completely feel like, yes, this is what this higher thing wants us to do. It is the thing to lead out. And then she has to make that decision whether to either not go along with it, with the consequences of that, or to submit and go along with it in as much as that frame. So, you see how, of course, this is fraught. This is a high tension moment. There's a lot at stake. But at the end of the day, I would say that even a woman in that position has a duty to submit and obey, even if she doesn't understand it completely or completely agree, if it's framed in those terms. And especially if, like, the guy has a history of not choosing, setting out a wrong vision or leading out in a wrong way or something like that. He's established a trust, if you will. Okay? So, but I put that out there because it is something that will probably arise in most kind of relationships. But again, the best way to look at it is that this is exactly the same thing with, like, myself and the police, the higher thing, the government, my local government, right? The local government is above me, you could say, in the hierarchy in a lot of ways. They'll ultimately do things, that operate in a way that I don't like, and oftentimes don't agree with. And at the end of the day, I have to either submit to that and obey their decrees, or I have to say I'm rebelling or protesting or I'm out of here. Same thing, right? And so you see how, framed properly, yeah, I do have a duty to submit to that government if it's operating within the frame of how it should operate. But if it's not, okay, yeah, protest, rebel, get out of there. And that's what I would do if my government in that kind of situation. So hopefully by framing it like that and seeing that the way that all of us have to submit in those ways would make sense why you would say a woman should submit under those conditions to her husband. But she gets to make the judgment, doesn't she, if the conditions are being met or not. And she has to say, am I going to trust my husband in this, or the head of the family, or am I going to not trust him? Because if you don't trust him, that comes with consequences too, right? All right, so hopefully that you can kind of see the importance of that point pushed to the extreme. The other thing I wanted to address here before the end is this matter of that underlies the whole reason why we see it wrong as saying the guy is the head, or that society might, and that's that this assumption that higher things are better things, okay? But as we've been building this, I've been giving an example just like that last one to show you that we all are in a framework where things are higher than us and lower than us, right? So even the President of the United States, which you could see is, one of the quintessential highest things in the world, the most powerful man in the world, as of yet, it's only been a man. Even the most highest, does he have things above him? He does, right? In as much as the United States is sovereignty of the people, there are the people at large above him. And then there's kind of the mantle of president is above them. That's been denigrated a bit in recent years, but before that there was this kind of spirit of what a president should be, established by the original quintessential presidents, the Washingtons and the Lincolns, that kind of hovers above the president of the United States, and they're expected to heed that kind of higher vision of what a president should be, and they in large part do conform and submit to that higher kind of thing of what they should be. So even the president has higher things. And if that's the case, well, it's like that all the way down. And does that mean the president of the United States inherently is a better person, more important, anything like that than all the rest of us? No, of course not. There's all sorts of equally influential, powerful people in the world, more important people than the president of the United States, other important people. And so you can see that in society, we're all in different ways having many things above us, many things below us. And so wherever we are in these hierarchies, we have the same duties of submission and obeying to that which is above, in as much as those things are looking to what's above them, right? And we have those duties to care and love for what's beneath us. So when you start looking at the world that way, then you start saying, okay, yeah, I can see why we should abandon this view that just higher is always better. It's tricky because we all do have this tendency to want to kind of climb hierarchies. There is something true about that. There is something ideal that even all religious conceptions always show God as something higher, and all of us, we're, just the very shape of a temple or a ziggurat. It's always like a mountain. There's always this notion of ascending up higher. So we always have these competing things. But if you look at Christ is the best example himself. He comes, again, as this lowest thing in many ways, and didn't need to be a king in the traditional sense, and didn't need to be the high priest at the time. He could have come as the high priest. He even recognized kind of the workings of the temple there, he cast out the money changers and not, but he still reverenced the temple. And of course, he even there's this notion of the Father being above him as well. So Christ comes, and even though he's the highest thing, he's the King of Kings, he's, still had things higher than him when he came. And he didn't have to be the highest thing in every possible notion for him to still be fully human, the most full human, right? So if we can start seeing things that way, then we can start seeing how the notion that the position of being the head of a family is inherently sexist or domineering or anything like that is just foolishness, right? When we look at the way hierarchies play out in all of society, right? And at the end of the day, just ask the children, right? Ask them who's more important in the family, right? They might say, well, my dad's kind of in charge, if they kind of have a little more assertive dad. But who's more important? If they get the essence of that question, they'll say it's their mom, right? And so again, none of this has suggested that women can't play the masculine part, and vice versa, that men can't be, even in a family, play a feminine part. As humans, we're incredibly adaptive. We can adapt ourselves very well. Like, men can play women's parts in plays, right? I just saw this child on YouTube. The great YouTube algorithm thought that I should see this video, and I actually clicked on it, of this like 10-year-old child being Ursula in a play. And he's really good. This 10-year-old child or like 12-year-old child, he was really good being Ursula, right? And a cello can, play a lot of the range of a bass, right? Or maybe the better thing would be like, a viola and can play some of the range probably of a cello, and a cello can play some of the range of a bass and play that music, right? And so there's these ways in which, men and women and masculine and feminine can fulfill all these different roles. We can do that. But nonetheless, like going back to Ursula, right? The most fitting person, the best person to play that part, as good as that boy is not going to be a boy. It's going to be a very, kind of witchy woman that's going to play that part better than probably any man possibly could, It's these things where at the extremes, men and women are different. At the extremes, we overlap tremendously, but at the extremes, we are different. And it tends to be that, certain pieces of music, you could say, are best played by certain instruments and have a little bit different range, you could say. I think these are the best ways to see them, because it's like, is the viola any better than the cello, or the cello any better than the viola? No, they have different ranges. They can play the same music, but there's certain kinds of music that are best played by each of those instruments, right? And so to me, the music of life sounds best when you have the more masculine instrument playing the part of the head, and the more feminine playing that more feminine, lower part. But that's just me, and people in life can do as they see fit. And so, again, all this being said, at the end of the day, in as much as we all are kingdoms and worlds in and of ourselves, we all have masculine and feminine within us, and so do any husband or wife relationship or any family. And we match up different ways our masculine to the feminine. No guy is perfectly masculine, so he can't just be purely masculine in everything and woman feminine in everything. That's where the yin-yang symbol goes in, that you're trying to find a way to fit each other's masculines and feminines in a way that fill gaps, as Rocky said. And so in that, everybody's relationship is going to look a little bit different. But on the most part, I think that men are going to fill more of that higher part of the head role, women less of that, and it's a more beautiful music when it's played that way. So that's what I have to say about that today. And again, I'm very much looking forward now to, that's kind of the body of what we have today, and I'm very much more looking to go back and seeing what else you've had to say in the chat. So if you have more things to say them now, get the questions out there, and I'll kind of keep on going until all that's exhausted. Okay. All right, Ratha LSJ, I think both women are sold a lie about the sexes and how they differ. Yeah, today is a tough world to be growing up in. I mean, it already was when all of us were young as well, because you get so many mixed messages. Some of the best movies reinforce completely these types of roles. And then we have all these messages around us that challenge them as well. And so it's a confusing time, right? Wis says, love your avatar at Watchmetry. Oh, nice. Wis, thanks. Wis, it depends on the age. What's better? If you're a beautiful woman, it's easier before 30 than it's easier for men. Okay. I'm trying to remember what part exactly that fits into. So if you want me to say more about that, but it's just a comment, then say more on that. If you wanted me to say anything more on that, but you might have just been participating in the chat. So, Ratha, responsibility grants authority. I like to be responsible for something. You must have some authority. If you take the authority out, you have some injustice. So, yeah, when you take full responsibility for something, just inherently an authority kind of imbues. And that's another thing, in the attributes of the head that probably should have been there in that list, is authority. I like that word because in the context of a family, you see that dynamic playing out so much when a man is operating as the higher part of the head. Women know this, that they can ask the kids, they can exert their authority in a lot of ways, and for the most part, kids do things, but sometimes kids start challenging that authority in ways that they need to get dad in there, because he just has, again, it's the kind of music that gets played. He has a little bit better ability to play the music of authority, you could say, and he can really hit it home sometimes in ways that kids just like, and he can lay down that authority, exercise the demons like I was talking about yesterday, if that's what needs to happen, through authority, and there can be peace again, in the world. But yeah, authority is a very important word in this. Ratha, like being demanded child support with no parental control. Yeah, that's a great point of how, there are these great injustices when you take away the authority, yet you expect still some of the responsibility from the man. Like the two have to go together. So it's a great point. Christian Nemo, Ratha, that's true. I definitely feel young men aren't taught well enough to be attractive to women. It's not about being yourself or being available. It's about being brave and upfront and capable. I'd say that's still like the number one thing. Guys have a little bit easier, even physically, as far as physical attraction, because women tend to care less about physical attraction, more about capability. Guys are more ruthless, you could say, on the physical attraction side. They tend to care more about physical attraction, less about other things, but that's, all things are relative. And of course, women have many ways to be beautiful and not just physically. So all sorts of women, by and large, you see them pairing up well with men. So there's still lots of possibility out there, even though as a whole, you have this little bit different thing, and guys have it at least a little bit better on some aspects, but on others, yeah, they have to show a lot of capability to impress many a woman. So, Gary, have you ever heard of incels? I think you would have a field day critiquing that outlook. Yeah, I've heard about them. I know, the kind of the basic sense of it, the involuntary celibates, but I don't know the kind of the full outlook and how they define themselves and what they're up to, as it were. So I need to look into that more, because it's an important part, of society. Somebody brought up the red pill movement a while ago, and that's another one that I'm glad you brought up, but I haven't been able to really plumb the depths of it, because with these kinds of movements, there's so often such symbolic and meaningful moves going on that aren't often even there at the surface. So you have to dig into and say, what are these people really up to? What's really going on? And that's a little bit the way I felt about incels, and I haven't yet taken the time to fully understand what's going on there. So Ratha, yeah, incels, involuntary celibates, are lonely and isolated men. There's a bit of a community online, but I don't think it's an ideology. Well, I can say just my little week here, at Mission Top, being the bachelor, and if I was, less of a masculine type of person out in the world, you could see how very quickly you could end up in that kind of situation, not knowing how to get yourself out of it and living in a very lonely world, whether it's a nice, beautiful one, natural one like I have around me, or a virtual worlds that a lot of these incels, I think, tend to live in, right? Christian Nemo Roth, yeah, I guess not ideology, but I think outlook fits them. So Martin Anderson, again, somebody new. I'm glad to see you on here. Hi, man. I think your analysis on Blade Runner 2049 and Gladiator is a masterpiece. I was wondering your thoughts on promiscuous behavior and what a man should be doing regarding relationships. Yeah, that's a tough one because, on the one hand, I could say, well, you need, like, for example, even my religious tradition has a strict standard on that, right? Which is, no sex before marriage, only within marriage. And there's a reason for that, right? That's the path that I took. And one thing that I think needs to be seen in the world, and I'd love to, again, to make some points and videos on this, maybe even using movies and stuff, is that there are ways to be fully sexual and develop sexually, growing up. Because me and my friends did it. We had plenty of interactions with women, with girls and women, sexual development, sexual experiences, and yet none of us, had intercourse before marriage, right? Or even did anything, that would be anything close to it, right? And yet, we were fully developed. These are great guys. These are guys that have had successful lives and across the broad spectrum of what you could term success. And we were completely fine with it. We weren't stifled at the time. So there's a way that in the right kind of community and stuff, that can make sense. And it is a good plan because there's something about the ultimate, intercourse sexual union that impacts you in a way that it is permanent, right? You can't just make it go away. And so people, that's the thing about promiscuity, is that, there's these more traditional, ancient kind of ways of talking about intercourse, such as, having knowledge about somebody, right? Or knowing somebody. There's this sense in which when you open yourself to that, expose yourself, if you will, there's certain ways in which you both know somebody and are known in ways that there's no getting rid of, that will impact you the rest of your life. Is that to say it will completely ruin your life or anything like that? No, it'll just make it more complex, right? And so that's where, like, even though my faith tradition has that kind of conception of a strict standard, even my faith tradition still has, ways of recovering from that, as it were. And then in the broader world, especially how our sexual standards have changed, I'm not going to say that somebody can't be promiscuous for part of their life and then be, more sexually kind of mature later in their life and their life goes well. But I guess at the essence of what I would recommend for people is for them to realize that sex, especially when it comes down to, the more intercourse, genitalia kind of sex that, is at the heart of what usually people are talking about. The thing that I would want people to realize is just how potent and powerful these experiences are, that they're not just frivolous experiences. They affect people. They affect people's, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, in ways that people aren't at all aware of. And so it's not just a matter of like getting somebody pregnant or not and just using proper birth control and stuff. It's way more complex than that. And I think that's what we see playing out in the world. I mean, think how the world, for the large part, had to deal with the constraint of children being part of promiscuity. And so there was a great constraint there, which is one of the reasons why marriage was such a more obvious solution across societies. But it's only been, 70, 80 years that like the birth control pill has been there. So as far as human history, this has been a very short time in which to figure out how can you carry on with all this, promiscuity, if you will, and what effect that has at us. And if we think we understand what effect it's having on us, like, we've got another thing coming, because we don't at all. We're still working through that. And so again, at the end of the day, I would say sex should be considered as something potent, sacred, important, and realize that when you involve yourself in it, that's the way it's affecting you. And so And children do end up become a part of it, regardless of birth control today, because people have a choice whether to use it or not, and it doesn't always work perfectly. So there's that component too. So personally, what I teach my children is still to do it within the confines of marriage for reasons that we'd have to have a whole episode on. But if somebody treats it with proper respect, I think they can still have fulfilling experiences sexually, even with multiple people, and still lead a productive life later on. I think there's reasons why for nearly everybody you're eventually going to come down to just being committed to somebody the more mature you get, right? But hopefully that's a little bit helpful as to how I see it as something vitally important and potent and sacred and should be treated thusly. And that's what leads you to would naturally lead somebody to be less promiscuous and treat it with much greater care, I guess you could say, before engaging in it. All right. Now I'm trying to find where we were. Okay, there we go. So that was Martin Anderson. All right, good. Ratha, a lot of them have mental and physical disabilities, so I think self-improvement is great. You still may end up lonely. Yeah, that's part of these problems of the world. The world inevitably will end up with people that can't fit into the regular conceptions. And as I said before, my answer on that is that these people must be cared for. They must be found to have the place where they can live out. There's always going to be exception people that just can't fit into these regular categories, and they must be given a place to still be useful, valued, honored, etc. And that takes a lot of effort, and it's not easy, but it's becoming of us to do that, right? Okay, LSJT, what do you think women can do to find good men or to test them? Oh man, that is tough, right? Because in this world, man, I'm gonna have to think about that one, because there's easy answers like find a community in which you're more likely to find good men. That's one of them. If you're able to find some good men, and then you start interacting with them, having them, and you're saying you want to test them, that's where there's this dynamic that I think is the best dynamic for a romantic relationship, where the space is given for the man to act, right? But it's not. It's there's a telegraphing that you want the man to act as well, right? So there's a part that the a girl plays to test a man, to say I'm giving you signals here that I want you to act like a man, that I'm testing you even. But those signals have to be given, and sometimes they might need to be more than you'd like, because some guys are pretty clueless, right? They don't see the signals, the subtle signals that a woman might be giving them, right? And so that's where showing them that you won't settle for them not leading out in forming a relationship with you, not treating you in certain ways that show the kind of role that you want them to play, and so not trying to fill the gap, not trying to make up for their errors. And at the end of the day, if you have to, just be straight out open and say no, this is what I expect of a man, right? That you need to do this for me, and it's your role. Some guys might need that help today, but I feel like I'm not giving great answers to that, and I'll have to think about it more over time. Okay, Wiss, depends on what you mean by good men, but to build a family, going to church can help be family-oriented people. And again, that's one place in communities, but there can be other communities beyond churches that would have good men in them, although again, it's difficult to come to mind exactly what those might be. I'm going to have to think about it. But I know they exist. Okay, Martin Anderson, loneliness is not the same as aloneness. Lonely is putting a mood on aloneness. Ratha, I think incels should adopt a satisfaction with aloneness. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't settle. I definitely think they shouldn't settle. And, if somebody can, again, encourage them, that's one of the words I like, rather than empower them, encourage them and find the right ways to light that fire under them. I mean, a lot of these incels are still younger guys. They still possibility in there of putting their life together. That's where I think Jordan Peterson kind of started having some effectiveness, is with these types of people, that there was still possibility there for them to act and stuff. I think incels should be in the best shape of their life and create a business. Success tends to remove celibacy. And so, yeah, there's so many things. Again, that's what I'm saying. There's so many things they could do and still could attract women. And, because in order, again, to attract women, it's not like you have to move a mountain, right? You have to just do some basic things. Have a stable job, have your act together, be heading towards something, reasonably respect-worthy in life. And there's, again, the odds are very good. There's a lot of great women out there that would give a guy like that a chance. So it's getting them in motion in that way, because a lot of them have just, again, they're, for lack of a better term, they're sucking at the teat or the breast of some womanly force, and it's hard to figure out the way to get them off of that and get into action, right? And that's where the rubber really meets the road with them, is how do you do that when they're already so down another path? Martin Anderson, think you guys confuse incel and MG2? Not the same. Carlos Jones, men become women, just are. Roth, I've spent some years on red pill communities online. It's just understanding the different sexual strategies of men and women, especially women. Yeah, I want to understand it better, and then I'd know better, so I don't pretend to know exactly what's going on with the red pill community. Martin Anderson, yeah, Roth, okay. These pillars from red, blue, purple, black, the MG2s, and the helping men become more aware. Man, some of your conversations are becoming a little bit hard to follow. But Christian, red pill has some truth for sure, but it is also like incels has plenty of people who vent frustration by denigrating women. Incels should be, what is MGTOW? Help me understand that, guys, if they want, but get a girlfriend if they want. I've only slept with my wife, would definitely recommend. It's underrated. Right, I mean, even by scientific studies, you show that people are more sexually satisfied generally with an ongoing relationship with one person where you're working, because a sexual relationship takes some work, right? You can get better at it, right? You can practice and get better, and it takes some work. So it makes sense that if you're just jumping from one person to another, the odds that it's going to just be continuously great are not that great, right? And so there is something to trying to master the art, as you will, over time. Of course, I'm being a little bit loose with this all, but there's very much some truth to that, and even studies have backed this kind of thing up. So it's good to put it out there to kind of counter, again, some of these notions of that are there in the world. So T. Roth, I think MGTO claim not to hate women or even to be concerned with them, but their whole movement is filled with men denigrating, complaining, reducing women to disgusting caricatures. Yeah, and that's one thing with like so many of these movements. You can see, like, if you take a basis, that's what I'm trying to do, right? If you take a basis of this basic respect, the way that you see other people, and then proceed off from that, you almost always end up right. It's very, you can't have bad fruit come from a good tree, if you will. But you got to make sure that tree's right. And so often what I see in movements is almost every movement out there in the world usually has something good to it. But they're also, if their tree wasn't right, there's bound to come out bad stuff in it too. And that's where it gets complicated, because you can't just label off that thing as good or bad, because a lot of them get mixed up with some aspects of truth and a lot of destructive things as well. And so that's where you see a lot of the social movements and protest movements. It's the same thing. A lot of the things people are protesting against in society today, or rebelling against, or all this commotion we see, there's always elements of truth. That's what I try to find, is what's the element of truth in it. But it doesn't mean at all that I accept the organization, because nearly every organization is also corrupt and has other less savory intentions, as you will, maybe not at the conscious level, but more behind the scenes in kind of spiritual forces or mimetic forces, even, you could say, behind those kinds of things. Okay, hard not to participate in promiscuous behavior when you have the options. Yeah, that's truth. I mean, again, that's why I say, Martin, that, I want to try to appreciate the fact that many good people in the world have started out that way, and I'm not oblivious to that. And try to lay down some impossible standard for everybody, that everybody just comes in to this. But, but it's also the case that as most men mature, they tend to narrow down to usually just a one partner, if you will. And so if you can see that there's a higher level here, a higher maturity that goes down to one partner, then you can try to see that in yourself, like, maybe I should be shooting for that now. I mean, that's the way I would look at it. Ratha, MGT are mostly harmless. They want to avoid divorce rates, so generally avoid marriage and long-term relationships. And women in general, it will definitely affect our culture if a lot of men go their own way. Oh, men going their own way. Okay, a man focusing on himself and his improvement. Like my week of bachelorhood at Mission Top, just going my own way, if you will. I'll look into it. I want to understand this kind of movement more. It's funny how there's these kind of little culture movements that come off and identify themselves as something and different from these other ones, right? Even though they overlap and stuff. This is the kind of stuff in society that fascinates me, even if I don't always have the time to delve into everything. Like, these are the things that are happening out there, right? And so it's good to understand them. Okay, but our culture is pretty busy denigrating men. Some denigrating women on forums seem like a minor thing. Aman, can we use the kingdom framework to understand the value of sex? Yeah, I mean, especially in that sense that, if each person is a kingdom, another person is another kingdom, when you're engaging in sex, you're essentially you're making two things into one. It's a union, right? Some of these things are so kind of obvious at their fundamental symbolic level, and so you are or should be joining into one in that same way. Here's one way to see it with, and this is one of the most powerful ways to see it, right? And so if you're just doing that flippantly and doing it for the pleasure aspect of it, then oftentimes you'll be joining yourself with something like a kingdom, let's say, that is not that great of a kingdom. Okay, so because somebody's just physically attractive, or you have the opportunity, right? You'll engage in that, and so ultimately there's some sense in which values attract to each other, but also something that what should I say? I won't go down that other aspect with it, but when you combine with somebody in that sense, there's this kind of resonance of values, and if you see that the person, you don't like them, you wouldn't want to spend your life with this person because there's obvious reasons there, and then you're choosing to completely unify yourself with them. Like, what does that say about you? That's the thing. If you are unifying yourself with somebody, and are you becoming a greater whole as it, or a worse whole with that person, right? And to even just ask that narrows down the field tremendously. If I were to join with, make this union of becoming one with another whole kingdom or entity, am I combining into a better thing with them? Okay, if you are, then yeah, maybe you should do it. But if that's your standard, chances are you're going to be narrowing down to much fewer sexual experiences. And once you have that person, why wouldn't, if you become such a greater person with that one, then you're going to be moved to stay and keep on engaging on that with that other person. You say, well, I'll do it with 2 or 3 of them at once. I'll be like, okay, try carrying on, try combining with 2 or 3 people and facing the complexity of that, and everybody comes out a better something from it. Not likely, right? So I'm glad you brought this up, because this is the framework that I usually approach sex in, is this of kingdoms, this combination of kingdoms in the efforts of becoming something greater out of it. And again, if you're not into that, if you're saying, no, I'll combine all the time with something that I know isn't something greater in the end, then again, what does that say about you? What does that say about them? And then ultimately, what are you doing to yourself because of that? to presume that doesn't have an effect on you is fairly naive in my opinion. So yeah, that's I think is the best way to do it. And if you can make that your standard, chances are you'll immediately start gravitating towards seeing the value of a stable sexual relationship with one person anyway, right? All right. Yeah, I'm glad you guys are keeping on talking here. So again, I'm always willing to stay on here. I know it's for those of you that are just kind of wondering what's going on. The body of this live stream is done, but again, I'm happy to see what you guys are saying and just respond and contribute as I can. Well, I'm very open to kind of just seeing what's on your mind. It helps me to conceptualize who's on here, what your concerns are, the way you think, etc. So bear with me as I have to kind of read down and find things that are helpful to bring out. Okay, LSJT Roth, I see your point, but I don't agree. Hate begets hate. Feminism has begotten MGTOW, but MGTOW is just a super angry feminist. It's just a cycle. Someone has to break it. Roth, I used to watch Barber and Stardust content. I think there's whole GT website. Okay. Complaining is not the way to improve anything. That being said, I think red pill is good at showing men are responsible for themselves. Yeah, so it seems kind of the essence of what's coming out here is that people are saying, I've found some value or something good in some of these movements, but then others are saying, yeah, there's something bad there too, and probably you both are right about it, right? Martin, hey man, what advice would you give to a person who believe in God but have a hard time following his word, especially when there are no communities in the area and that of the church are feminine? Good question, right? So you believe in God but have a hard time following his word. Yeah, because these things, ultimately, like the pursuit of God is extremely difficult. Well, not extremely difficult. You can always start doing it solo, but these things are much better done within traditions, within communities, because then you have a framework, a guidance. I guess I would say, yeah, if you're soloed, I would start with those who are best at kind of framing that relationship with God in the right way. And honestly, the two or three most influential people in recent years for me that have helped me to kind of see a kind of spirituality and relationship with God that is the most productive and something I can apply every day. And you see that it's not so much about like strictly heeding commandments per se, and never doing anything wrong. But it's much more of a process and much more of putting yourself in kind of the right structure in your life, where even when you do make mistakes, sins, it's not this woe is me, not denigrating, but woe is me kind of thing of great guilt and things like that. But it's much more of like, hey, I made a mistake. That's all right. I'll reorient and continue on this process of improvement. So the most helpful people in recent years for me in this light have been Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pageau especially. Like that's one where the whole framework of how he frames out Christianity is infused in everything I've been talking about, and gives just a better framework where you realize it's not that religion isn't just this like list of moral rules to follow, because that's kind of what I'm sensing you is that you're seeing like, I see that there's these right things to do, and I see that I'm not fulfilling these kind of rules or right things to do, and that's troubling to you. Well, I think when you properly frame religion and see much more of it as kind of a whole structure of the way that the world is, then you just more naturally fall into that behaving well in that structure, and realizing that when you make mistakes, as everybody does, that they're not something to be ashamed about or beat yourself up about. They're just a natural part of the process of kind of advancing in this structure of the world. So yeah, Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pageau, John Vervaeke have been kind of the three foremost people for me in recent years of helping me to kind of have a better spiritual framework. But ultimately, I hope that what they would do and what I would do is, yeah, try to find yourself a community. And that, I can't even like, of course I have my own community, but I was born and raised in this. I'm proud of it, but I don't don't pretend that it's like the solution for everybody everywhere, and that's the Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormons, which we've been calling ourselves the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the official name of the church. So that's mine, but Orthodoxy has fascinated me, or Eastern Orthodox Christianity has fascinated me in recent years. That's Jonathan Pageau's tradition, but even he says, this church, it has problems within it. He recognized that. So that's what I'd say is try to find yourself the best thing that you can, and something's better than nothing, but don't expect perfection in these things. And best wishes to you, because it's a difficult time in this kind of light. That's why so many people still are leaving religious traditions, because they're not doing the best job, in my opinion, of kind of framing their own system right in a way that's like engaging today. And that's why it's so hard to just say, oh yeah, just go to this church or go to that church and everything will turn out right. If anything, I would try to find like-minded people such as yourself and do it as a group of friends or people. Try to find that pursuit, or try to find people that you really like that belong to some tradition, and then see, well, maybe that's the tradition for you. If you already have these relationships with people that you like, then you join into that tradition, right? So anyway, again, a difficult question today, and one that I'm not suggesting there's easy answers to, but at least there's nice resources to get yourself started in a spiritual development. And then once you do that, like, that's the way life usually works out, right? That once you give like an extreme focus on developing yourself better in some way, such as like a spiritual pursuit, the answers, the solutions will present themselves to you in that process. It just naturally kind of happens that way. So that's what I'd say to that. I hope that was at least helpful in a little bit of way. LSJT, I agree, distinguish between red pill and MGTOW. Again, I'm going to have to just look into these a lot deeper, because you guys know a lot more about them than I do. Carlos Dura, check Kevin Samuels interact directly in his podcast with real women and their expectations regarding men to settle. Okay, check out that. Martin Anderson, I thank you for all the wisdom you gave me today, and God bless you. Take care, Gary, and chat. All right, and I think with that, it sounds like a good ending point. Thank you, so many of you, for being on here today, and the great chat. This is probably the most involved chat that we've had so far, and it's now gotten me aware of these other movements that I want to look into and try to understand a little bit better. So I, again, will be back tomorrow. Today's Wednesday. I do these Monday through Friday at 11. Today ended up being a pretty long one. I've always kind of had the notion of going shorter with them, but they don't always turn out that way, especially as these kind of topics develop over the day and whatnot. So thank you for being on here. This is Gary signing out from Mission Top, and hope to see you back soon.